20 failures in a row. That was the number Sergeant Tyler Brooks counted before sunrise, and every single one felt like a nail in his career. At Fort Granite, where the cold Arizona desert air hit hard before dawn and the dirt stuck to your boots like wet cement, Tyler stood with his arms crossed, staring at his platoon with growing frustration. Sweat poured down the faces of 23 young Marines, all lined up on the gravel training field, breathing hard, shoulders shaking, chests heaving. The push-up qualification should have been simple. 50 push-ups in 2 minutes. Basic. Standard. Nothing extraordinary. But this morning, like the 19 mornings before it, they failed. Again. Tyler checked his watch and clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. 3 weeks until regional inspection. 3 weeks until the brass came in to evaluate his entire training program. And if his unit kept performing like this, his shot at promotion to staff sergeant would disappear. He had built everything around discipline. Around strength. Around proving himself. But now his squad looked weak, sloppy, and exhausted. Get up. Tyler barked as Private Logan Reed collapsed at 37. You call that effort? Logan rolled onto his knees, gasping. Sir. I gave it everything. Tyler stepped closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. If that's everything, then everything isn't enough. Around them, the rest of the platoon kept their eyes forward, too afraid to look up. Tyler hated what he was seeing. Soft hands. Weak minds. No endurance. These kids came in looking sharp, talking big, but when the pressure hit, they folded. The same story over and over. Across the field, the chain-link fence rattled softly in the morning wind. Beyond it, Tyler noticed someone standing there. An older man. Heavyset. Gray hair under a faded baseball cap. Thick stomach pressing against an old Marine Corps sweatshirt. He held a brown paper bag in one hand and leaned lazily against the fence like he had nowhere better to be. Tyler frowned. Civilians weren't supposed to hang around the training grounds this early. The man didn't say anything. He just watched. Quietly. Calmly. Almost amused. Private Mason Cole noticed him first and smirked. Look at that guy, he whispered to Logan. Guess that's what happens when you retire and live off donuts. A few of the guys laughed under their breath. Tyler didn't stop them. Honestly, he was too angry to care. But something about the old man's expression bothered him. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't judging. He just watched like he'd seen this scene 1,000 times before. Tyler turned back to his platoon. Listen up, he shouted. If you can't do 50 push-ups today, how are you supposed to survive when it matters? Silence. Just wind. Just breathing. Just shame. Then from behind the fence came a rough old voice. Calm. Steady. Sharp enough to cut through all of it. Maybe they're training for numbers, the man said, instead of training for purpose. Tyler turned slowly toward him. Every Marine on that field did the same. And for the first time that morning, Tyler felt something he hadn't expected. Curiosity. Tyler Brooks stared at the old man through the chain-link fence, his patience already thin from the morning disaster. The recruits shifted awkwardly, some trying not to laugh, others pretending they had not heard the comment. The heavy-set man stood there like he belonged, wearing worn-out boots, faded blue jeans, and an old Marine Corps sweatshirt that had clearly seen better days. His gray beard was uneven, his stomach round enough to make the younger Marine smirk, and his paper bag crinkled in his hand as he casually pulled out what looked like half a sandwich. Tyler stepped toward the fence, narrowing his eyes. You got something to say, old man? The man chewed slowly, swallowed, and shrugged. Just saying your boys look tired. Not weak. There is a difference. Private Mason Cole laughed loudly. Tired? We are doing push-ups, not climbing Mount Everest. A few others joined in. Walter Hayes did not react. He simply looked at Mason with calm eyes, like the joke meant nothing. Tyler folded his arms. You think this is funny? Walter shook his head. No. I think it is familiar. Tyler glanced at his platoon. Sweat, frustration, embarrassment. 20 failures. The old man was getting under his skin. Without even trying. Familiar? Tyler asked. Walter nodded toward the field. Young men trying to prove strength by counting reps. Happens every generation. Logan Reed whispered to Mason, loud enough for everyone to hear. Looks like somebody ate all his reps. More laughter. Walter looked down at his stomach and smiled. Yeah. Life adds weight. Tyler could not help it. He smirked for the first time that morning. And I suppose life made you an expert too? Walter wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped closer to the fence. Up close, Tyler noticed something strange. Walter's hands were massive. Thick knuckles. Deep scars across the fingers. Not the hands of someone soft. Not the hands of someone who spent years sitting on a couch. But Tyler pushed the thought aside. You ever serve? Tyler asked. Walter tapped the faded eagle, globe, and anchor stitched into his sweatshirt. Long time ago. Mason laughed again. Back when push-ups were probably easier because gravity was weaker. The platoon burst into laughter. Even Tyler let it slide. Walter only smiled, almost like he expected it. Maybe, Walter said. Tyler shook his head. Look, old-timer, unless you are here to volunteer for morning drills, keep your advice to yourself. Walter leaned against the fence, took another bite of his sandwich, and nodded. Fair enough. Tyler turned back to his men. Back in formation! The recruits lined up again, exhausted but alert. But before Tyler could start the next round, Mason looked back at Walter and grinned. Bet you cannot even do 10. The field went quiet. Tyler looked over his shoulder. Walter stopped chewing. His eyes lifted slowly. For the first time, there was something different in his expression. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Just interest. And Tyler suddenly realized the joke might have gone farther than any of them expected. Walter Hayes looked at Mason Cole for a long second, then folded up the paper bag in his hand and tucked it into his back pocket. The morning wind swept across Fort Granite, carrying dust over the training field as every Marine waited for his response. Tyler Brooks watched closely, half amused and half irritated. He expected the old man to brush it off or walk away. Instead, Walter stepped right up to the fence and rested both hands on the metal links. 10? Walter asked, his voice calm. That is your number? Mason grinned. You look like 10 would put you in the hospital. Laughter exploded across the line. Logan Reed bent over, trying to catch his breath while laughing. Tyler did not stop at this time. In truth, after the miserable morning they had all endured, the tension almost felt welcome. Walter looked at each of them carefully. No anger. No embarrassment. Just patience. Then his eyes settled on Tyler. These your men? Tyler nodded. They are. Walter tilted his head. And you teach them to laugh before they listen? Tyler's jaw tightened. The words hit harder than he expected. Before he could answer, Mason jumped in again. Come on, old man. If you are so smart, show us how it is done. Walter smiled faintly. You think strength is about showing off? Mason crossed his arms. I think you cannot back it up. Tyler stepped forward, deciding to take control. Enough. The laughter stopped. Tyler looked at Walter with a sharp expression. You want to criticize my training, then maybe Mason has a point. Show us what you mean. Walter looked at the dirt field, then back at Tyler. And what would proving it change? Tyler answered immediately. Maybe it would prove whether your advice is worth hearing. Walter let the silence hang for a moment. Then he asked, How many can you do, Sergeant? Tyler straightened. 82. Walter nodded slowly. Not bad. Mason smirked. He is the best here. Walter looked at the recruits and then at Tyler. And how many can he do when his lungs burn, his arms shake, and the man next to him needs him to keep going? Tyler frowned. What is your point? Walter's eyes hardened slightly. Push-ups are not numbers. They are will. If all you train for is passing a test, you fail when it matters. The words landed heavy. Tyler hated how true they sounded. Mason shook his head. Big speech for a guy who has not even touched the dirt. Tyler looked at Walter and made a decision. Fine, he said. You think my platoon is doing it wrong? I will make it simple. He pointed to the center of the field. 100 push-ups. No stopping. No breaks. Right now. The recruits stared in disbelief. Some laughed. Some shook their heads. Tyler folded his arms. There was no way this old man could do it. Walter looked at the ground for a moment, then slowly took off his sweatshirt. Underneath it, the room for jokes suddenly got smaller. Across his arms and shoulders were faded scars and old muscle hidden beneath age and weight. Walter stepped toward the gate and said quietly, "Open it." Tyler Brooks stood still for a moment, staring at Walter Hayes as the old man waited at the gate. The laughter from the platoon had faded, replaced by the kind of silence that only comes when people realize something unexpected is about to happen. Tyler reached over and unlocked the chain-link gate, pulling it open with a sharp metallic sound. Walter stepped through without hesitation, moving slower than the young Marines but with a steadiness that felt deliberate. Every eye followed him as he walked toward the center of the training field. Mason Cole shook his head and whispered to Logan Reed, "This is going to be ugly." Logan smirked, but even he sounded less certain now. Walter stopped at the center of the dirt and rolled his shoulders once, stretching his neck as if preparing for something routine. Tyler stepped closer, arms crossed. 100. Tyler repeated. No stopping. If your knees touch the ground, it is over. Walter nodded. I heard you the first time. Mason laughed. Might want to call an ambulance now. A few recruits chuckled nervously, but Walter ignored them. He looked at Tyler instead. And if I finish? Tyler narrowed his eyes. Then I will hear whatever you have to say. Walter smiled. Good. Tyler checked his watch. The recruits gathered in a half-circle around them, still breathing hard from their own failed attempts. Some looked amused. Others looked curious. None of them believed what was about to happen. Walter got down on the dirt slowly, planting his hands shoulder-width apart. Tyler noticed again how thick those hands were, scarred and rough like old leather. They looked stronger than they should. Walter stretched one leg back, then the other, holding himself in a perfect plank. Tyler blinked. The form was exact. Not sloppy. Not uncertain. Mason folded his arms. He will not make 20. Tyler raised his hand. Begin. Walter lowered himself and pushed up. 1. Smooth. Clean. Then 2. 3. 4. Each rep was controlled, measured, almost boring in its precision. The recruits started counting out loud. By 10, the smirks were still there. By 15, the jokes had stopped. By 20, Tyler noticed something strange. Walter's breathing had not changed. No shaking. No hesitation. At 25, Mason frowned. Logan looked at Tyler. How is he still going? Tyler did not answer. He was too focused. Walter's back stayed flat. His elbows bent at the same angle every time. His pace never changed. 30. 31. 32. Tyler felt his own chest tighten. This was not luck. This was not stubbornness. This was training. Real training. The kind that lived in muscle memory for decades. At 40, Walter paused for half a second at the top, looking directly at Tyler. Still counting? He asked calmly. Tyler swallowed. Keep going. Walter nodded and dropped again. 41. 42. The sun was climbing now, casting long shadows over the field, and for the first time that morning, no one laughed. Because every Marine there was starting to realize they were watching something none of them could explain. Walter Hayes kept moving like a machine that had never been turned off. 43. 44. 45. His pace never changed. The gravel beneath his hands shifted slightly with each push, but his body stayed straight as steel. Tyler Brooks stood only a few feet away now, no longer watching out of amusement but out of disbelief. He checked Walter's elbows, his breathing, his shoulders. Everything was exact. Clean form. Efficient movement. Nothing wasted. The recruits were counting louder now, almost pulled into it against their will. 46, 47, 48. Mason Cole had stopped smiling. Logan Reed looked pale, like he had just realized his own 37 push-ups were nothing compared to this. At 50, Walter rose to the top and held for a second. Sweat rolled down his forehead, but his face looked calm. Not comfortable. Not easy. Just controlled. Tyler glanced at his watch. The old man had hit 50 faster than half his platoon hit 30. No way, Mason muttered. Walter dropped again. 51. 52. 53. Tyler folded his arms tighter. Something was wrong here. This was not supposed to happen. Not with a man Walter's age. Not with that body. The extra weight should have slowed him down. It should have crushed his shoulders by now. But instead, Walter looked stronger with every rep. At 60, his breathing deepened, but it stayed steady. Tyler noticed the scars again. Old lines across his forearms. Burn marks near his shoulder. And there, half hidden under sweat and dirt, an old faded tattoo. A Marine unit insignia Tyler had only seen once before in a military history book. His stomach tightened. 61, 62. The recruits were no longer laughing. They were leaning in. Watching like they were seeing something impossible. Walter's hands pressed deep into the dirt, his fingers spread wide, gripping the ground like he had done this 1,000 times before. At 70, Mason whispered, "This is insane." Tyler ignored him. His eyes stayed locked on Walter. He started remembering Walter's words. Push-ups are not numbers. They are will. And now Tyler understood what that meant. The old man was not doing this to prove he was stronger. He was doing it because he could not imagine quitting. That difference hit Tyler harder than he expected. Walter pushed through 75. Then 76. His arms finally trembled. Just a little. The recruits saw it too. Logan leaned forward. "He is slowing down." Tyler shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "He is pacing." Walter reached 80 and paused at the top for a single breath. His chest rose and fell, sweat dripping into the dirt. Mason stepped closer. "That is enough, old man." Walter looked at him, breathing hard now. "Enough?" he asked. Then he smiled. "Son, enough was 40 years ago." And before anyone could respond, Walter dropped back down and drove himself into 81, 82, 83. Each rep heavier than the last, but somehow stronger, as if the weight of age was no match for whatever carried him forward. Walter Hayes kept going, and now every push-up felt heavier than the last. 84. 85. 86. His breathing was louder now, deeper, but still measured. The kind of breathing Tyler Brooks had only heard from men pushing beyond exhaustion and refusing to stop. The entire training field had gone silent except for the sound of Walter's palms hitting the dirt and his steady exhale with every rise. The Marines who had mocked him only minutes earlier now stood frozen, their eyes locked on the old veteran like they were witnessing something impossible. Mason Cole had completely lost his grin. Logan Reed looked like he could not believe his own eyes. Tyler stepped even closer, kneeling down slightly to watch Walter's form. It was still perfect. Not rushed. Not sloppy. The old man's arms shook now, but his body stayed aligned. Tyler felt something strange in his chest. Respect. He did not want to admit it, but it was there. At 87, Walter paused at the top for a second, staring down at the dirt as if remembering something far away. Tyler noticed the faded tattoo again, clearer now through the sweat. He knew that insignia. Recon Battalion. Elite. Hard men. The kind that did not just survive training, but defined it. Tyler's mind raced. How had he missed that? Walter pushed down again. 88. 89. 90. The recruits finally started counting again, but this time their voices were low. Serious. Almost reverent. 91, 92. At 92, Walter shifted slightly, and Tyler caught sight of a long scar stretching across his shoulder blade, old and deep. Not from training. From real combat. Tyler swallowed hard. This man was no joke. This man had carried something none of them understood. Mason leaned toward Tyler. Sergeant, who is this guy? Tyler did not answer because he did not know. But he knew one thing now. Walter Hayes had lived a life these boys could not measure in repetitions. Walter hit 93, then 94. His pace slowed. Sweat poured into the dirt beneath him. His elbows bent slower now. Every push looked like it cost him more. But there was no hesitation. No thought of quitting. At 95, the front gate slammed open behind them. Boots hit the pavement fast. Tyler turned and saw Colonel James Carter walking toward the field, his face hard and focused. The recruits snapped to attention, but Carter barely noticed them. His eyes locked on Walter immediately. Tyler saw something in the colonel's face he had never seen before. Shock. Real shock. Walter pushed up 96. Carter stopped cold. That cannot be, he whispered. Tyler looked at him. Sir? But Carter did not answer. Walter dropped again. 97. 98. The colonel stepped forward fast now, staring like he had seen a ghost. Tyler looked between them, confused. Walter's arms trembled harder, his breath rough now, but his eyes never lifted. 99. The field held its breath. One more. And whatever was happening here was about to change everything. Walter Hayes lowered himself one final time, his chest hovering inches above the dirt as every muscle in his body trembled under the weight. The entire field stood frozen. Tyler Brooks could hear nothing now except Walter's breath and the wind cutting across Fort Granite. Even the colonel stood motionless. Then Walter pushed. Slow. Heavy. Steady. His arms locked out at the top. 100. Complete. Silence swallowed the field. No cheers. No laughter. Just 23 Marines staring at a man they had mocked less than 10 minutes earlier. Walter held the top position for another second, then calmly dropped one knee to the ground and stood up, brushing dirt from his hands like he had just finished warming up. Tyler could not speak. His mind was still trying to catch up with what he had just seen. Walter took a long breath, wiped sweat from his forehead, and looked at Tyler. Still listening? Tyler opened his mouth, but before he could answer, Colonel James Carter stepped forward. His face had changed completely. Gone was the command presence Tyler knew. In its place was something much deeper. Respect. Without hesitation, Carter raised his hand and saluted Walter Hayes. Every Marine on that field stared in disbelief. Tyler's eyes widened. He had never seen the colonel salute anyone outside official ceremony. Walter gave a small nod back, but no salute. Carter looked at him like an old memory had just stepped out of the past. Walter Hayes, Carter said quietly. I have not seen you in 30 years. Tyler looked between them, stunned. Sir, you know him? Carter turned to Tyler, almost offended by the question. Know him? He looked back at Walter. This man trained half the recon instructors in this division before you were even born. The words hit the platoon like thunder. Mason Cole's face went pale. Logan Reed looked like he wanted to disappear into the dirt. Tyler stared at Walter's scars, the tattoo, the hands, and suddenly every piece fit together. Carter stepped beside Walter and faced the recruits. During Desert Storm, Walter Hayes led extraction teams through conditions most of you cannot imagine. Heat over 120 degrees. Miles of rough terrain. Carrying wounded men on his shoulders. He saved 32 Marines in one mission. Not a single recruit moved. Walter looked uncomfortable hearing it. That was a long time ago, Walter muttered. Carter ignored him. This man taught endurance before it became a textbook. Before fancy fitness trackers. Before any of you started counting reps for social media. Tyler felt his stomach tighten with shame. He had mocked this man. Challenged him. Treated him like he was nothing. Walter bent down, grabbed his sweatshirt, and slipped it back on slowly. Mason stepped forward, his voice barely audible. "Sir, why did you not say who you were?" Walter looked at him and smiled faintly. "Because if a name is all it takes for you to listen, then you are learning the wrong lesson." Tyler lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, Sergeant Tyler Brooks felt small. And Walter Hayes was not finished teaching. The silence on the field felt heavier than the desert heat now rising over Fort Granite. Walter Hayes pulled his sweatshirt over his shoulders and picked up the brown paper bag like nothing extraordinary had happened. But to every Marine standing there, everything had changed. Tyler Brooks looked at the dirt beneath his boots, his mind replaying every word he had said that morning. Every joke he allowed. Every judgment he made. Colonel James Carter stepped back, folding his hands behind him, watching closely. He knew Walter well enough to understand that the real lesson had not started yet. Walter looked at the platoon one by one. His eyes stopped on Mason Cole first. "How many did you get this morning?" Mason swallowed. 39. Walter nodded. Then Logan Reed. 37. Walter kept moving down the line. 42. 34. 28. Each number came out softer than the one before it. Finally he stopped in front of Tyler. 82. Walter smiled faintly. "Good numbers." Tyler looked confused. "Then why are we failing?" Walter dropped his paper bag onto the bench nearby and walked to the center of the field again. "Because you are training the body before you train the reason." Tyler frowned. "What does that mean?" Walter bent down and drew a line in the dirt with his boot. "This line right here," he said, "is where your body quits." Then he drew another line 6 feet ahead. "This is where your mind quits." Then another line 10 feet farther. "And this is where purpose takes over." The recruits stared. Walter looked at them. "Most of you stop at the first line because your muscles hurt. Some push to the second line because pride keeps them moving. But almost none of you know how to reach the third." Tyler crossed his arms. "And how do you reach it?" Walter looked him directly in the eye. "By knowing who depends on you." The words hung in the air. Walter pointed at the platoon. "Out there, in the real world, you do not keep going because a stopwatch tells you to. You keep going because the man beside you might not make it if you quit." Mason lowered his head. Logan stared at the ground. Tyler felt the truth settle deep in his chest. Walter walked over to Logan and knelt beside him. "When you dropped at 37, what were you thinking?" Logan hesitated. "That my arms were dead." Walter nodded. "That is your problem. You were thinking about yourself." He stood and looked at all of them. "Pain is always loud. Purpose has to be louder." Colonel Carter smiled quietly, hearing the same words Walter used decades ago. Tyler stepped forward. "Can you teach us?" Walter looked at him for a long moment. The pride was gone now. The arrogance, too. In its place was honesty. Walter nodded once. "I can. But first, every one of you goes back to the dirt." Mason blinked. "Right now?" Walter smiled. "Right now." And for the first time that morning, not one Marine complained. The Marines dropped to the dirt without hesitation. No jokes. No eye-rolling. No complaints. The same field that had been full of laughter and failure less than an hour earlier now felt different. Heavier. Sharper. Walter Hayes stood in front of them with his hands behind his back, his old sweatshirt hanging loose over shoulders that still carried decades of strength. Tyler Brooks stood beside him, no longer acting like the man in charge, but listening like a student. Colonel James Carter watched from the edge of the field, saying nothing. Walter looked over the platoon. "This time," he said, "nobody counts. Numbers make you quit early. Today, you go until the man beside you wants to stop. Then you carry him with your effort." Tyler nodded slowly, understanding now. Walter pointed at Mason Cole and Logan Reed. "Pair up." Then the rest followed. Walter gave one command. Begin. The Marines started. The first 20 looked easy. At 30, shoulders started to shake. At 40, breathing got rough. But this time something was different. Logan looked at Mason when he wanted to quit, and Mason kept going. Mason looked at Logan when his arms burned, and Logan kept pushing. Tyler watched it happen. Not because they wanted higher numbers. Because they refused to be the first to let the other man down. Walter smiled. That is the third line, he said quietly. Tyler looked at him. Purpose. Walter nodded. By the end of the set, every Marine had gone farther than they had that morning. Logan hit 52. Mason reached 56. Even the weakest recruit crossed 40. Tyler could hardly believe it. Walter walked over to Tyler and looked him in the eye. Your men were never weak. Tyler swallowed. I treated them like they were. Walter shook his head. No. You treated them like machines. Men are stronger when they know why they are fighting. Tyler stood silent for a moment, then straightened himself and faced the platoon. Listen up. Every Marine looked at him. Tyler took a breath. This morning I failed you. I pushed for numbers and forgot what those numbers are supposed to mean. That changes today. The recruits looked surprised. Mason especially. Tyler rarely admitted fault. Then Tyler turned to Walter. His voice was steady. I owe you an apology. Walter smiled faintly. No. You owed them leadership. That hit harder than anything else that morning. Walter picked up his paper bag and turned toward the gate. Tyler stepped after him. Will we see you again? Walter paused and looked back. Maybe. He glanced at the platoon. If they remember the lesson. Colonel Carter watched Walter walk away into the morning sun, the same quiet way he had arrived. Tyler stood there, staring after him. The old man had shown up looking like someone easy to overlook. But before leaving, he had reminded every man on that field of something they would never forget. Strength is not measured by how many times you can push yourself up. It is measured by how many times you refuse to stay down when someone else needs you standing.